Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room 237, and now we finally come to the last of the Hammer Frankenstein series, 1974's Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, which this is just a cheap-ass, bare-bones, Paramount widescreen version that I found. I don't really mind the cover. I mean, the cover's better than some of the DVD covers I've seen, but I do love the original cover. Kind of reminds me of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. But I believe this film was actually made earlier. It was filmed at Elstree Studios in 1972, but not released until 74. Why, I'm not sure. But, so yeah. Since 1957, 7 films, 6 of which with Peter Cushing, the great, amazing Peter Cushing. All except for the previous one, which was Horror of Frankenstein, which I reviewed, which is just a standalone comedic retelling of Curse of Frankenstein. And, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I don't really know why this film was made. I mean, the previous actual one in the series with Peter Cushing, Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, I thought had a great ending. It had the best climax of the whole series. Excellent, truly evil performance by Cushing. And, you know, it was Frankenstein's creation that was his end. I thought that would have been a great ending. But the film did well when it came out. Then, of course, they wanted to do their tongue-in-cheek comedy. And then I guess they felt the need to do more films, but just happened to be the last one. And this was not received very well. And where I mentioned the aspects of the film, the story of the last two, Created Woman and Must Be Destroyed, had elements of tragedy, especially Must Be Destroyed, and how I liked that. This film had some real life tragedy because this was the first and only Frankenstein film to be made after the passing of Helen Cushing, Peter Cushing's longtime, dearly, dearly beloved wife of 28 years. In 1971, you know, when she passed, he even said how it felt like his life ended when hers did. He fell into a deep depression, very stressed out. Really couldn't feel like they could go on. He could go on. It was a truly devastating blow to Cushing. I mean, he loved that woman very, very, very much. But he found that the only coping mechanism that worked was to stay busy and to stay acting. And he often would say how, you know, our time apart's only temporary. He believed in God. He believed in the afterlife. They would be reunited. He would go on to say that, you know, the rest of his life is just killing time. But she left a poem behind for him saying, live your life to the fullest. And so he stayed as busy as he could. And I think he was hoping for, you know, Hammer had always been a constant thing since the late 50s. But with this in 74, they really didn't carry on much after that. if anything else at all. Like 74, 75 was when they stopped making horror films. Might have even been this film, but he still stayed busy. But it did take a toll on him, yeah, physically and his health. I mean, the depression and the stress. He lost a significant amount of weight. His age caught up to him, or he aged much faster. So much so that when he did Dracula AD 1972, his character was supposed to be a father to another character. But by the time they came down to filming, they had to rewrite it to be the grandfather. And this film, you know, he's very gaunt, very fragile looking, which it kind of helped give him more of like a sinister look. But I think Hammer's answer or solution was to put this toupee on him, which Cushing did pick out and help design, because Cushing's always been very meticulous about every detail for his characters. But he, years later, going to say he regretted putting on the toupee. But nonetheless, the tone of the film is very, is a very sort of bleak, gray, kind of depressing, downer kind of film. Like, I would kind of liken it to, like, Day of the Dead. Like, Day of the Dead is a very, you know, kind of colorless, gray, but really just kind of bleak. And, like, because this takes place in an insane asylum, way out in the middle of nowhere in Victorian era, whatever country it's in. And I mean, the old mental patients are in just like, the cells look like dungeons. And it's, I don't think the budget was very big. I think they knew this was probably going to be the last film. It has one of those vibes. It's like, you have a series that had a great film that could end it, but then they decided to do one more, and the budget just isn't there. And it just kind of, it feels kind of sad. But also just, you know, the atmosphere and the mood is bleak as well. How he survived the end of Must Be Destroyed, I don't have a fucking clue. I guess Hammer never really intended to have a completely linear of narrative. Each film does contradict things that happened in the previous one. He does make a reference to how his hands, he can't do, he's a surgeon, but he can't really do surgeries because his hands were burnt in the name of science. Possibly the ending of Must Be Destroyed. But Baron von Frankenstein is dead. And that's what he wants everyone to think. He's buried out in the courtyard somewhere. So he goes by Dr. Carl Frank. Dr. Carl Victor. So he went by Dr. Frank, Dr. Stein, now he's Dr. Victor. And Carl was his assistant in the last film. He's the head surgeon of this insane asylum, which the reason why he has that position is because he has some incriminating information on this guy, the asylum director of Adolf Klaus, played by John Stratton, who's corrupt and he's got some perverted tendencies. And one day there's this young man named Simon Helder, played by Shane Bryant, who is like Hammer's version of Malcolm McDowell. He reminds me of Alex in Clockwork Orange a lot. not as a character, somewhat looks, but I guess like demeanor, just like sometimes when he's, like when Alex is being charming, like how he just looks around with his smile, being charming, kind of reminds me of that. He's a doctor who was found insane for body snatching, but he's been an admirer of Frankenstein for a long time, trying to become him, but he's been unsuccessful. Frankenstein, or Dr. Victor now, has been impressed by this, so he takes him under his wing as his apprentice. Wow. And the only other person that they really have helping is there's this mute girl, played by Madeline Smith. Her name is Sarah, who is the director's daughter, and she's mute and has been mute ever since her director father tried to rape her. Yeah, it's a really bleak, depressing film. And Frankenstein has his own special patients in his own wing, where there's red dots on the doors, and there's this one patient who's a genius. He's a mathematician, he's a violin prodigy, and so he wants his brain. And then there's another inmate who, he's an artist. He's a brilliant sculptor of wooden figurines. He wants his hands. But all these men, are homicidal, can snap, are twisted in some way. But there's this other patient who Herr Schneider, played by David Prowse, which David Prowse was the Frankenstein monster in Horror of Frankenstein. He's the only person to have played a Frankenstein creation in more than one Hammer film. Which actually, I'm going to, because I don't remember which one it's in, but it'll save me time from trying to find a good image of it. But, so yeah, Frankenstein, he takes the parts that he wants from those patients, and the young guy, Helder, decides to stitch them all together, and pretty much what we get is this giant, hulking, hairy as fuck, primitive man Frankenstein monster, played by David Prowse. Which Prowse and Cushing would be reunited later as Darth Vader and the guy Peter Cushing plays. I'm not the biggest fan of the look of the monster. I mean, I like how he looks different. They went for something different. But it doesn't really make sense, because, I mean, like, his hands are still huge, even though he took the hands from a smaller patient. And, he's mute, he's dumb. He somehow gets an idea of who and what he is, decides to go on a killing spree, kills some of the patients, kills the director, and then finds himself in a mob of patients, and they all just overpower him and rip him apart. It's got some good gore. I mean, like, when he kills the director, his throat gets ripped out, and it looks great. When they're swapping the brains out, the brain that was in this body just falls on the floor, and the camera pans down, Cushing just kind of kicks it out of the way. Cushing, of course, who was 59 years old at the filming of this, not in the best health, also severely depressed because of the passing of Helen. His body wasn't in the best shape, but he still wanted to do the stunt where he jumps off the table onto the monster's back. And just the ending is so anticlimactic compared to Must Be Destroyed. It ends with him sort of yelling at all these people, like, I think he's pissed that they tore his monster apart, but he also said it was for the best because of such a big, dumb creature. And he says something like, you can all either go back to your cells, or you can go back home, or you can stay and clean up. And then, he looks at Simon and Sarah, and he's already pondering his next creation and who will be donating first. Because that's the whole reason why he's there, just to find he's kind of like the Creeper from Jeepers Creepers, as a sophisticated German, well, Cushing's English, but Frankenstein's German, scientist and doctor. He gets to find the body parts that he wants and finds sufficient, and then he kills them, and then he takes what he wants: brains, hands, whatever. Yeah, the ending is so anticlimactic. You had such a great ending with a Must Be Destroyed. Then they wanted to do their comedy, and then they figured, hey, let's do more Frankenstein films. And they only did one, and it was this one, it also just goes at a slow pace. It is one of the slower paced ones. This was the last film to be directed by Terence Fisher. So, this whole thing was sort of the wrap-up of a whole generation, a whole era. Because I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that this was the last... Alright, list of horror films. Hammer filmography. Alright, 1970s. Okay, well, they went on until 1970. Well, this came out in 74. They did Man About the House, based on a television series. Shatter, and then they did the Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, which I don't care to see right now. To the Devil, a Daughter in 1976, and then The Lady Vanishes in 1979. And that was it for 28 years, until there was the revival in 2008. But I don't even know if those are horror films. No. Man About the House is a sitcom. And then Shatter is an action film. To the Devil, a Daughter. Okay, that's a horror film. Directed by Peter Sykes. And then the last one, The Lady Vanishes. Comedy mystery. So they did the last Dracula film, and then one other horror film. And this was the last one directed by Terence Fisher. So this is really the tail end of Hammer horror. And just with its bleak, sort of gray, gloomy. That's what I'm looking for when I say gray is gloomy. Just, it's a swan song, basically. And I mean, even the last Dracula film also has martial art, more like a martial arts action film, which is why I don't really care to see it. Plus, it's not really part of the series. Cushing still gave a great performance for the condition he was in. You know, his body aging rapidly and losing so much weight because of the depression and stress that I couldn't even imagine what he was going through. But he still gave a great performance. It's very different. He's not, he's not made out to be as evil as Must Be Destroyed. One, because he doesn't rape anybody in this one. But yeah, it's in the look of the monster and I guess the setting. It really feels like a failed attempt to keep going. It is a disappointment. Probably, as far as the Cushing films go, the most underwhelming, disappointing of the series, but I don't put any of that blame on Cushing whatsoever. But, so there we have it. The final Frankenstein Hammer film. I don't know why I had a hard time with that. I've still got the rest of Dracula, rest of Universal, and then I'll move on to the next marathons. But, so there. Whole other Frankenstein series done. Thank you for watching.